I would like to call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Des Moines Public Schools to order for February 20th, 2018. Please take the roll.
Here. Natasha Newcomb. Here. Ms. Delagardelle Shelley.
Here.
Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Barron.
The first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the agenda. Are there any special requests? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve the agenda as printed. We have a motion from Natasha Newcomb and a second from Cindy Ellsburn. Any further discussion? Please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our February 6th, 2018 meeting. I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve minutes.
We have a motion from DeLaGardelle Shelley and a second from Anderson. Any discussion or corrections? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda is district recognitions, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Ahart.
Good evening, Board. As some of you know, members of the Polk County Board of Supervisors were to be with us this evening for a check presentation. However, there's been a change in schedules, so they will be with us at our next meeting. But tonight we do want to note an upcoming date that commemorates an important activity for a growing number of students at DMPS, speech and debate. Very important to me as a former speech and debate coach. Speech and debate are activities that go hand in hand with many of the things we value in education, from critical thinking to research to communications. They give students skills that apply to any field of study and they can carry with them for the rest of their lives. Here at DMPS, we have seen a growing number of students participate and succeed in this activity, from more opportunities at the middle school level to greater success by our high school teams. And one school, Roosevelt, continues as a perennial powerhouse at the state and national debate circuit. It's only fitting that this activity has a special day of its own. I'd like to invite Steve Schappa to please join me to talk more about National Speech and Debate Education Day on March 2nd. Steve is not only a 2002 graduate of our very own North High School, he is also the Director of Community Engagement for the National Speech and Debate Association, formerly known as the NFL. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. It is my honor to be in front of you today to talk about speech and debate and the importance that it plays in a student's educational experience. As Dr. Ahart mentioned, I'm a proud graduate of North High School, and an integral experience that I had while a student was the speech and debate team. I was able to take classes in speech and debate as well as travel around the state and as well in the Midwest to compete against students from all over the country. It is speech and debate that taught me that I can compete with anybody academically. It paved my future as an educator, where as a teacher and a school administrator, I became focused on empowering student voices. I am continually in awe of the things that are happening here in Des Moines Public Schools. Grateful that we have expanded opportunities at the middle school level and a program in all of the high schools this year. Additionally, as Dr. Ahart mentioned, we have increased participation. At North High School, Akbari Godpower was a finalist at the district competition, which was the first time that has happened for North in more than a decade. So as an alum of North, that is a particularly proud moment that I was able to witness. East High School was recently recognized. Mrs. Jennifer Medina was honored as the inaugural Iowa Speech and Debate Educator of the Year. Very proud that that first award went to somebody in Des Moines Public Schools. Thrilled to have seen so many students from Lincoln competing at the district tournament, making it to finals. Really moved by their performances when I was able to judge them at the district competition, taking up important issues that our society is facing today. And quite frankly, engaging in those issues in a much more respectful and powerful way than many of the adults in our society. And so I'm thrilled that we've increased dialogue with Des Moines Public Schools as the national organization's home moved to the metro area 2 years ago. Thrilled with the efforts of Dr. Ahart, the activities departments, and the administrators across the district who have shown a commitment not to just celebrating speech and debate on March 2nd, which we're extremely grateful for, but for cultivating it across the district so that we can work together to focus on critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity for the wonderful students of Des Moines Public Schools. So thank you for your commitment and support.
Thank you.
Formal sign in? You need something to say? All right. There we go.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Before continuing with our regular meeting, I would like to remind the audience that we allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information table to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among the board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Ms. Ellsburn, I believe that you have the consent motion.
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $2,887,391.41.
We have a motion to approve the consent items. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second on the consent items. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda is item number E1, males of color. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter, and then we'll move to the presentation.
Yes. Tonight, we have our Males of Color report. We have a whole host of folks supporting this work who are going to help in the presentation today. For those of you following along closely at home, you'll note that this is in the style of a formal monitoring report. However, at this point in time, since there is not a specific policy that addresses males of color, this will not be voted on as a monitoring report. However, it's directly supportive of one of the primary goal areas as dictated by the board. So it's a very important report for us because it doesn't speak only to males of color, which we signed on to several years ago as part of President Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative. It's also a great measure of how we're doing in regards to our work around equity. That really drives all of the work that we're engaged in at Des Moines Public Schools. So with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Jake Troja.
Thank you. I get to start first. Thanks, Tom. Board, thank you for having us up here this evening. We have lots of folks with us that are presenting this evening. We're going to try to keep the report to around the presentation around 40 minutes. We just happen to be the select folks that are representing our Equity Monitoring Committee. We're going to get started with that. Our hope is to kind of provide a high overview, maybe the things that outside of the report that aren't in the report that you saw. So some other data points that we're hoping to help support the Males of Color report that you have already received. So as mentioned, my name is Jake. I'm the Director of School Climate. I'll have these folks do their introductions when they speak, but this is the main presenters you see in front of you tonight. Our brief agenda here, we'll review kind of the executive summary in our own words that you saw in the report. We'll respond to the data that's in the report in those three main buckets, the same buckets that are in an equity plan. We'll provide a school example with Edmonds here and Janette Rittman, and we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So jumping right into our executive summary.
So my name is Jumara Villanova Mitchell, and I partner with the district to provide support to the equity work we do. And we would like to start by just bringing our equity vision for the district to the forefront as we do this report. So I'll give you all a couple minutes to just glance through that again. in everything we do for equity, we keep this in our minds because we feel it's what guides us in our work. Can we change it? We also would like to provide a brief reminder that our short-term monitoring for the equity effort we have at the district level is the equity plan, and our long-term monitoring for the progress of the males of color in the district is the KPIs that the board has set and this report. We like to keep both really well aligned because we think one thing depends on the other. So we just would like to remind everybody of that.
So before we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to indicate that our presentation is divided up in these three main areas around the learning, thriving, and belonging. We have speakers for each one of those categories and some data points to further emphasize that we're in addition to the report that you received. So just to pull out some of the major responses that we had regarding the data, we just wanted to pull out some of those bullet points that help guide our discussion for the rest of this evening. We're very excited that the data indicates some accelerated academic growth for our males of color in all schools, but specifically our schools for rigor and our first-year demonstration schools. We have identified that chronic absenteeism for our males of colors was our area of focus, and we'll kind of explain some of our responses to that data throughout this report or this presentation. Some of the major other executive summary bullet points we're going to point out is that our Office of Academics schools, we've really worked collaboratively together to work at that equity data-driven analysis tool, which helps us really look at data across the whole district and make some decisions on what's the best way to have outcomes for students, but specifically for males of color. And then we've collected multiple feedback from students and other stakeholder groups, specifically regarding the attendance piece, and we'll dive into that a little bit further in our response to the data. I wanted to highlight a little bit further why we've picked attendance, and you may have saw in the report that we used the term as the linchpin for what we believe would be to begin to close gaps with students. We're excited about the preliminary data, and we'll have some slides regarding that here coming up. But the data that shows us that our males of color are keeping pace with other students within the district. But one of the things that we want to emphasize around that was that continue to focus on our schools for regular work, blended with our equity work, and really blended with whole child health is where we feel like will be the next way for us to close those gaps. One thing that, since we focus on attendance, I thought it would be interested to point out some of the general absences reasons that we had for first semester males of color high school. So this is our high school data that you see in front of you. And just wanted to kind of look at that and how that may give you perspective on some of the other data that you saw in the report. For example, you see reports around referral data, out-of-school suspension, and such. And just wanted to give this in perspective that when we look at, illness, for example, makes up 9%, out-of-school suspension makes up less than 1% of total absenteeism for males of color in high school. When I look at that bottom line there, unexcused absences almost equal 82%. Just to kind of put that in perspective, that's over 32,000 hours of instructional time missed because of unexcused absences. So just wanted to highlight why we're focusing on attendance, not other topics within the report. Just to kind of give you a nice visual of what that looks like. So we'll have the rest of this report will be kind of our response to those data points and highlight kind of our continuing work. I'll have to tell you that it's very difficult for us to talk about the things that you'll see in this presentation because we have so many different things that we're working on to increase results, but we've tried to pick out the things that we feel will help provide a better understanding for everybody in the board here.
So the overall response to data is to continue to increase organizational capacity to support the equity effort at the district level and at the building level. We have right now 6 standing committees at the district level that are our way of building capacity internally to support the work and collaborate very intentionally to implement the goals we have set. At the building level, we have started collaborating with the New York Leadership Academy, which is a consulting group that we have selected to develop curriculum for the training, the intensive training that some people in the buildings will go through to assist the principals with the work that's happening at the building level. We are very excited about both things. We think that building capacity at the district level is a must, as the work is big, and we have to have the internal capacity to carry it on, and also at the district, at the building level with the equity leads and the training they will receive. The other thing we want to continue doing is aligning schools for rigor, equity, and the whole child health. We have noticed that the schools that have had the best success these last 6 months were the schools who have done a good job integrating the schools for rigor with the equity work we are suggesting they do, and also attending to mental health needs, trauma, informed care, and providing students with tools to self-soothe and distress. And so that's why Janet is here to share a little bit of how she's done that and illustrate the growth they have seen there. We also want to continue to prioritize cultural proficiency and equity professional development for all school employees. I work on an ongoing basis with several teams, and we provide 500 leaders a monthly professional learning session related to equity and cultural proficiency. We also have the buildings provide weekly sessions to all staff, and with the equity leads in place next year, we intend to intensify the building level sessions so that we are aligning the leader sessions with the staff sessions. We also, in addition to these sessions, have sent large groups from all teams to conferences that are available nationally so that we keep our networking and our learning going at all times. The other thing we want to continue doing is embedding community, student, and family voice into the decision-making process at the district level. I am very proud of the fact that every data analysis meeting that we have done this year, we have had this year at the district level, has been collective, so there is representative of all departments, Office of Schools and Office of Academics together, and also it includes student voice, families input, and community partners input. That is something that we have started doing this year, and I think it's a huge piece of the equity work. I'm very proud of it. So every time we look at data and we try to brainstorm solutions for the problems we identify, we ask them, what should we be doing? Because we can't figure this out alone. The next slide is a simple visual that illustrates just the structure we have built to support the equity work at the district level. And there are examples of some groups on the left side that I have been working closely with, providing professional learning on an ongoing basis. Within these groups, there are other groups that I work with, such as the Welcome Center, the Office Managers team, the EL leads, and different other groups, but I didn't want to list all of them. And then on the right side of the visual, you can see our committees, our standing committees for the district level. And these committees are the venues we use to request feedback when we're looking at data. And also these are the people who help me with the professional learning sessions for leaders and the people who help implement and monitor the equity plan collectively. Now we want to share with you a little bit about the learning bucket. We have had, the learning bucket is a celebration point for us this year. We have seen accelerated progress for Black and African American students, which we are very happy about. We, for the first time, have not had our achievement gap increase this year. We haven't started closing it, but it's not increasing anymore, and that's district-wide. It's a huge step moving forward for us. If we can accelerate their growth a little faster, we start closing the gap, which is what we intend to do. So we want to continue emphasizing the Schools for Rigor model. Demonstration schools are showing very accelerated growth for Black and African American males in both reading and math on MAP. We also want to continue the intensive literacy support for schools. The elementary schools receiving targeted early literacy support are showing a 12% increase in Black and African American males growth on the MAP reading assessment. In addition to that, the curriculum department has worked intentionally on selecting materials, instructional materials that reflect the students' backgrounds, adjusting curriculum and instruction to reflect the students' backgrounds, and also including student voice more intentionally in the work we do in the classroom. So as we look at the data, Schools for Rigor reading percent of projected growth math on MAP fall to winter for elementary schools, Black and African American males from last year to this year that were in the demonstration schools went from 58% to 123%, with a gain of 65%. The year one implementation schools went from 76% last year to 97% this year with a growth of 21%. And all the other schools went from 64% to 92% with a growth of 28%. Hispanic and Latino males in the demonstration schools went last year from 58% to 134% with a growth of 76%. Year one implementation schools went from 84% to 85% with a gain of 1%, and all the other schools 76% to 94% with a growth of 18%. For MAP, we went from schools for rigor demonstration schools 90% to 127% with a growth of 37%. Year one implementation schools went from 79% to 112% with a growth of 33%. All the other schools 83% to 103% with a growth of 20%. Hispanic and Latino males on the demonstration schools went from 92% to 117% with a growth of 25%. Year one implementation schools went from 97% to 102% with a growth of 5%. All the other schools went from 83% to 105% with a growth of 22%. Now for FAST, K3, we went on the demonstration schools last year 45.88% to 55.34% with a gain of 9.46%. And then year one implementation schools went from 47.35% to 43.46% with a loss of 3.89%. And all the other schools went from 41.13% to 37.30% with a loss of 3.83% on FAST. The intensive literacy support reading percent of projected growth on MAP fall to winter was for Black and African American males. Intensive support schools went from 73% to 105% with a gain of 32%. Other schools went from 65% to 96% with a gain of 31%. And for Hispanic and Latino males, intensive support schools went from 62% to 94% with a gain of 32%. And other schools went from 81% to 96% with a gain of 15%.
So we're going to move into the thriving bucket. Some of the takeaways that we had in that area, specifically looking at those bullet points there. Obviously in the report there was many bullet points, but again, we just want to highlight some of the comprehensive work that we're working on. One of the things that we're working on in our department is a complete redesign of how we support schools and the school climate, culture, and community team. We are working on how we can create a framework that works towards whole child health, looking at physical, social, emotional, and mental health, and how that gets played out within schools. Second thing that we're really working on is creating a task force to help us design and implement K-12 social emotional behavior curriculum, focused really on the CASEL competencies, CASEL competencies, which include self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. That's a really big undertaking. Just to kind of give an example what that may look like is really we'd be moving away from a system that looks at wrongdoing like referrals, where we just talk about what students get wrong, to what students can do and what they get right in terms of skill building and decision making. The last one there is we're going to continue to improve and leverage community partnerships to help us meet the student needs. Obviously you see a team of folks up here within the district, but we're fully aware that we cannot accomplish this task by ourselves. And just to highlight a few of the things that we've been working on within the district, but continue to leverage our partners within the community to help us create meaningful change within our school. So I'll turn it over to Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Vukovic. I'm the Director of Community and Schools for the district. So Jake talked a little bit about whole child health. One of the things that we are able to do this year with support from the Department of Human Services and Juvenile Court through decategorization is we added the position of Behavioral Health Services Coordinator, and that position has really helped us hone in on the mental health needs of our kids in our school buildings. We have school-based therapy in all of our buildings. but we had some room for growth and really tracking what was working for that position. So now we have a person who's really honing in on the mental health needs of our kids. We've also been allowed to be a part of the School Health Services National Quality Initiative, and that's through our work with this partnership with decategorization. We also recently put out 2 RFPs, one of them for our student assistance program. So we'll have a provider coming in to do a student assistance program that is free of charge to all of our students. And we're also looking at doing an intensive home support, and that was an RFP we put out. And what we really want to do is be able to support that whole child through both of those programs. We're also doing trauma-informed care work at Scaville High School, and that is a partnership with Young Women's Resource Center and Mid-Iowa Health Foundation. So we currently have over 90 partnerships with the district, and through those partnerships, we serve 7,400 unique students. From those partnerships and their work with the students, they're serving 70% of our students of color. 21% of students that they serve through partnerships are ELL. 84% of the students who we serve through partnerships are not chronically absent. So we know our community partners are doing great work, and the more that we can get our students involved and out of school time programming with our partnerships, it really is helping us get great outcomes for our kids. The other thing that we have found through our data is 90% of our students who are being served by partners have 0 to 1 referrals, and 83% of those students have 0. Through partnerships, we have the Vision to Learn partnership. Last year was our pilot year for Vision to Learn, and that's a partnership where our kids get glasses free of charge. Last year, we piloted at 5 elementary schools. This year, we expanded to 19. By the end of this year, we will have over 900 students who have been screened and received glasses. We also have our health clinics, and through our health clinics, we've served 320 individuals at Scavo and 214 individuals at Hoover, and 190 students at our dental clinic. Through partnership with the Food Bank of Iowa, we also have 10 school-based food pantries. We serve almost 900 students monthly through our food pantries. So I think in the thriving, and that's really where a lot of my team's focus is, we know our kids are going to have better outcomes when they're healthy. So we want to do everything we can to engage the community in the health of our students. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason. He's going to focus on belonging.
I'm going to introduce the overall parts here first. So as you can see, that there's a lot of things that we're talking about to help kind of fill out that picture. And just to kind of go back to the beginning, the reason we had started with that visualization around all the team partners and all the teams within the district that are working on this is that it's a very large undertaking. And so this is kind of rounding out that conversation for us. A couple things that we know that we're going to continue to work on is increasing the accuracy of our attendance data. We focus on that in different areas across the district. We're going to continue to do that so in the attendance, so we know exactly what our problem is and how we can solve it. We're going to do that across different avenues, but really help our data come more accurately to us. And again, we're going to continue to create high-quality, differentiated, engaging extracurricular activities where we see males of color have disproportionately positive outcomes. So Jason's going to talk a little bit about some of those outcomes here in the next few slides.
Good evening. My name is Jason Allen. I'm the District Director for Activities and Community Education. This first slide that you see deals with our overall participation. I think over the last probably 4 to 5 years, we've made some really intentional efforts, and I believe some inroads in providing more opportunities for students. I think what you don't see here is that if we pull the last 3 years, we've continued to make upward trends. And so what you see for 17-18 does not include any of our activities, or at least not the fullness of our activities for our spring sports and or activities there, as well as our summer. And so we're pretty excited about our increasing numbers for males of color in both of our larger subpopulations there. We're also excited that we've made increases with our performing arts. You know, typically those are areas where we've not seen that level of growth. This year we have, particularly with our band, choir, and our orchestra. And so in addition to increasing the number of students participating in clubs, because we've been able to create some very unique ways of providing what we call wild cards that offers unique opportunities to schools to really serve those different subpopulations. That has worked incredibly well. In addition to that, we've also seen some really inroads in some of our athletic sports. And so which leads us to not only what you see here in terms of increases in participation for males of color, but really increases overall. This next slide, as we look at our attendance data, again, I think there's a lot to be proud about as we look at percentage of students who have less than 90% attendance. I think the thing that I'd like to highlight is when you look at the 20 to 21% differential between students, males of color who are involved versus not involved. And I think this speaks directly as we look at this bucket to the connections that are being made with our coaches, with our sponsors, that are being made with our families, that are being made with our students who connect with their teammates. These activities have also created an experience where students essentially feel engaged, and it provides another means for them to come to school besides the math and the science. Average daily attendance, and I just kind of want to reinforce kind of what I mentioned before. Again, just providing the evidence that activities I believe is to be effective. Specifically, when you look at our high school students, that's a 7% again difference between students that are actually involved versus not involved. And I think it's multiple things. Again, it's not it's any one factor, but I think it's a collaboration of a lot of things really working well, specifically with a lot of things that this group up here is doing, but working again within our schools to provide some really great programming. Our GPA, again, for high school students, notice that, at all of our levels, so all of our males of color, in addition to our two subpopulations, we see increases. Males of color, 0.60, Black and African American males, 0.56, Hispanic Latino males, 0.62. I mean, we're talking literally difference in letter grades for students that are participating in activities, and there's multiple reasons for that. Again, for many of our activities, we offer study tables, or we have different eligibility policies, or we provided different support programs that help to incentivize students not only to do well in the classroom, but also to come to school and to actually demonstrate good behavior. One of the programs that aligns with what Dr. Hayhart had mentioned earlier, one of the initiatives for our males of color is our Brother to Brother program. The program in itself has been in existence for probably at least 10 years, but we've had it stipend, in other words, where we provided additional more support for the last 3 years. And, we have a matrix of responsibilities that we expect all of our chapters. I'll talk a little bit about how many chapters we have, but the focus is on, improving our academic achievement, personal development, professional growth, and also engaging in service learning. And so we expect students who participate in this program will excel in the classroom, will establish positive relationships, will be leaders in their community. When you look at the straight numbers over the course of the last 3 years, you can see that we've made incremental growth in this program, starting out with 49 students. This year, we're up to 220 students. I also wanted to mention one of our partner programs, which is Sisters for Success, although you didn't ask for it, but this was a program that started back in 2002, where we start putting more stipends around it probably 3 years ago. And as you can see, we've also made just a little bit of progress there, going from 40 students to about 326 students, which their sole purpose, part of their purpose was really to look at how do we, reduce behavior issues and increase, self-esteem of our females of color. Finally, with our Brother to Brother, again, looking at the matrix of responsibilities, we've been fortunate to offer a lot of opportunities for them, whether it be as a district, because of the funding that's been provided through district funds as well as through some grant funds. Some of that has included, some college planning or college visits. We have a group tomorrow that'll be going to Iowa State University, or professional growth opportunities where where students have had a chance to attend conferences, another one of which will be in March, or through just personal development and partnerships with the Civic Center, which allowed our students to go and participate as an educational experience in STOMP, or through some service learning where they've done some volunteering at some of our schools.
All right. I'm not Janet. Before I turn it over to Janet, I just want to kind of just tie those things back together. And Janet's going to provide some examples of how at a school site, all three of those buckets work together. I just want to double down on the emphasis regarding attendance and looking at, we see some gains in learning, and the way for our students to continue to close and exceed those gaps is for us to really increase the attendance. And that's why we wanted to kind of give some examples around the thriving belonging bucket, so you can see some of the things that we're doing across the district to really help increase and decrease that attendance issue, and for us to really get after decreasing those lost hours that we had of instruction. So I'll turn over to Janet Rittman, principal at Edmonds Elementary.
Good evening. I'm Janet Rittman. I'm the principal at Edmonds, and I am honored to just share our journey and bring the equity plan to real life on just some of the things that we're doing at Edmonds. And we're just one sample. We have lots of elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools that are doing wonderful things. So we're just a sampling of what we are doing. But looking at equity and looking at the learning, we are Schools for Rigor. We're year one, and we are working extremely hard to create classroom learning environments to really prepare our students for the 21st century and just the new economy skills, teaming, disagreeing, agreeing, and making that a real life experience for them. We've really narrowed our focus for learning, and we have focused on two subgroups. Our first subgroup that we really focus in on our special education population, because we felt like that was that subgroup is the subgroup that needed to grow the most. Our other subgroup is our African American population, and that is our largest subgroup population, and so that's why we really are honing in on our African American subgroup as well. As you can see, as a building, our reading MAP scores for special education increased to 82.23, as well as math for special education increased to 103.57. With reading MAP scores for African American, we increased as a building to 107.01, and math MAP scores for African American to 115.71. And it's really important to note that when you are at 100%, you're maintaining your gap, and anything over 100%, you're closing that gap. So we're super excited about the growth that we're making at Edmonds, and we're, again, focusing on that learning bucket. And we do a lot of work with our thriving bucket. And with that is the next slide is talking about EC3, and that's our school-wide expectations. And when we started 5 years ago, we really were doing a lot of things, and we were doing PBIS, and we were doing Capturing Kids' Hearts, and we were doing Responsive Classroom, and we really didn't feel like we were making a lot of growth. And we came together as a school and put our minds together and really came up with EC3, which is Culture, Climate, and Content. So you can see there that culture is really what we're all about. It's our mission and it's our vision. It's who we are. Climate is everything that staff need to know. We need to teach staff in order for them to teach students. And so we're providing them the foundational skills that they need for the climate of our organization. And then content is everything our students need to know. If we don't teach our students what they need to know, they're not going to be able to do it. And so you can see on the next slide that we really focused in on everything that we were doing, and we broke it down and we categorized it into these three categories, and just made sure that we were aligning everything so it was the success for our students. Continuing with the thriving bucket, we've spent a lot of time with mindfulness, and the reason for that is there's so many challenges for our students, the stress and the anxiety that they come with throughout the day and that they have at home. They're chaotic, it's a chaotic culture right now. It's sensory overload. There's so much going on. Our brains are so full and we don't know how to turn them off. And then just the trauma that students are coming with. And we quickly realized they had an inability to self-regulate, and they couldn't control their emotions, and they didn't know how to turn it on or turn it off. And so one thing that we came up with is just our solution was yoga for classrooms, and just teaching our students how like you can see there, I am learning to self-regulate my emotions to become a better citizen. And by that, our students are able to really kind of take a deep breath, look at themselves within, and figure out what they need to do to control and self-regulate their own emotions. And that's been extremely important and very helpful for our students. We also look at the whole child. And so when we're looking at the whole child, we're looking at behavior, we're looking at attendance, and we're looking at mental health as well. We look at behavior data, and our behavior data has significantly decreased in referrals. And part of the reason for that is just the tiered interventions that we put in place. We have check-in, check-out, social skills, individual plans, leadership groups that we put in place. When we look at attendance, we're also looking at data. We're looking at data all the time. Our African American males regularly attending school is 97.4%. Our overall population, school population, is 97.2%. So we're very proud of that, and some of the things that we have put in place for that are attendance groups and personal phone calls home to parents, letters home to parents, home visits. We have an attendance team that we have in place that is constantly looking at attendance and where we need to reach out to students and to families. We also look at the mental health issues and concerns, and we have decided that after looking at just self-regulating and thinking that maybe that was the only thing that the students needed, is they just needed to learn to self-regulate. We found out quickly that that's not the only thing that they needed. They need to also be taught how to just interact in that social emotional well-being. And so we are looking at piloting, we're in the process right now of piloting second step with a kindergarten classroom, 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. And we've done a pre and post assessment because, again, we're looking at data and we want to make sure that it's the best thing for our students to teach them how to not only self-regulate, but how to problem solve and how to move forward from the situation that they've gotten themselves in or they're in. And just reaching out to the whole child through all of those areas. And then looking at more data, we actually looked at a group of 3rd grade students that were really struggling at the beginning of the school year. And you can see that slide in October. There was a real spike in referrals in 3rd grade with our African American subgroup. And so we really kind of dove into that to try to figure out why, what was going on, what could we do to support them, and we came up with some strategies, and you can see by the decrease of referrals, the impact that it's made. So the strategies that we had were breakfast club, after school programming with emphasis on project-based learning. Students just completed PowerPoints on their favorite sports figure or their anybody that they wanted to research about, and it was all their interest, and it was exciting for them to see. And then they shared at our EC3 all staff meetings, and so they got to present to staff, so they thought they were very special for that. And then having them incorporating student interests, and then having yoga leaders within the classroom and within the building are all examples of things that we've done to enhance and decrease the referrals that were happening in 3rd grade for our African American subgroup, and it was pretty significant. And so we keep looking at that to see where we need to go next. Then we moved into belonging, and belonging, we look at parent and family, community, students and teachers, just the things that we're doing with parents and families. We do Oak Ridge blitzes where we go over and we knock on doors and we invite parents to different happenings that are happening at our building, including conferences, and we have that partnership with Oak Ridge and 21st Century Grant that has just enhanced our relationship as well. Attending outside events during the after the school day, outside of the school day, that our students are involved in, whether it be football, baseball, basketball. or any other events that they have that they'd like us to attend. We have family nights and culture nights where you can see we've had very large attendance, and we reach all of our parents for conferences. We will not stop until we've reached every single parent, and that we pride ourselves in that. Community, we do Teammates Mentoring Program, Simpson Connection, Everybody Wins, Drake Football. We're just trying to really connect with the community and bringing in adult role models that can support our students as well. With students, we've started breakfast with the principal, so I can start hearing their voice, their likes, their dislikes, what they want to see more at Edmonds, and they really want like athletes to come in, and that I've heard that K5 now, and I hear it over and over and over, and I will, and probably until we get some people in there. But we're working on that. We're working with the Wolves to see if we can get them in. Just meaningful leadership roles, and then really listening to student voice, having them be part of our expectations throughout. When we set our school-wide expectations, they had a voice in that, and it was interesting, very interesting to hear what they said. And then teachers, our teachers, we've gone from myself doing our equity PDs to our teachers lead the equity training now, which has been really great and really receptive to all staff. And then we're really looking at embedding equity into our instructional practices, and that's been super exciting, and our students are very engaged because of it. The last thing that we really focused in is we focused on our Gallup survey, and with our Gallup survey, I can turn the page here, we increased hope to 80% and engagement to 95%. Last year, our hope was around 60% and engagement was about 74%. And some of the strategies that we looked at were just integrating that into counseling lessons, Hope K5, and really teaching students what that means, administering it in a small group and taking it very seriously. If we take it seriously, students are going to take it seriously. And then building wide decision-making based on the survey results. We're looking at that data and we're trying to decide where we need to go next and what we need to do for our students. And so that was exciting for us to see the gains that we saw this year, because we just we looked at that data last fall and made those adjustments throughout the year. So
Thank you, Jeanette.
that's all I have.
So that, we made it under our 40-minute window with 2 minutes left to spare. So good job, team. So we have the last couple minutes here for questions, and we just wanted to take a chance to respond to those questions you may have had.
I have a couple clarifying questions. When you're giving
Yes.
percentages and you're giving over 100%, particularly when we're talking about growth, that means there are students that are making more than the 1 year's growth. Am I tracking that right? So if a percentage is
Yes.
127%? Okay, I just wanted to clarify that I was reading those numbers correctly. And then, sorry, when you're talking about the your Brother to Brother program and your Sisters for Success programs, it seems like there's a lot of opportunities for growth with students, and we're talking about, you know, a few hundred students. So I know the impact for those students' lives is extremely profound. Can you give me some sort of sense of, I know that the buildings have expanded, but what are the percentages of students within that building? It's probably fairly low. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, it varies. What we try to
Okay.
do is keep in a perfect world, we'd probably keep a 12 to 15 ratio on that, because these are individual sponsors working directly with them. In certain circumstances, that may be a little bit lower. We have some buildings as high as 20 to 25. That's probably too high, but because of the ambition of the sponsor, and we try to give them some extra levels of support to help to make that as effective as possible.
Yeah. How are those students identified to take part in those programs, or is it they kind of volunteer to join, or?
No, typically what we do is that we have I mentioned the matrix of responsibilities. So we try to have a certain, standards by which we'd like to establish, criteria. Here's the criteria. Okay. And then working closely with the schools, that might be the counselors, that might be the principal, that might be different people within the schools, to identify, who might be a good fit for the program. And then for those students who maybe are kind of on the edge, then we also say, hey, if we can take some students that we do believe that it'll really be they'll have a good impact while still trying to maintain the program. Because again, when you're talking about weekly to bi-weekly and or monthly meetings, and then trying to establish, some regular activities, it can be a challenge. And so you really have to make sure that students are really interested, while at the same time looking at students that you feel, we could really,
That you
make
really
some.
need to draw in.
Yeah, we can really
Okay.
impact.
Okay, awesome. No, I think I'd heard, I didn't know the name of the program, but I think I'd heard of it before, and so I was excited to get more information, so thank you.
Other board questions? Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, earlier at the beginning, you said that with the cultural professional development that you were reaching out and getting student voice and family voice. What does that look like, or how many right now, or how do you identify,
For the student voice piece, we have the District Student Advisory Committee that meets with Dr. Ahart monthly. And every month when we plan our data analysis meetings, we bring the topics we're going to be examining to them to get their perspective. And these are the same students who are part of the YPAR course and are examining the district for equity issues, and their recommendations will bring back to you and put in our plan, hopefully. And then for the family input, what we did was we combined our Equity Advisory Committee that was in existence last year with the SIAC committee. And this new committee that was recently formed is going to be the committee that we're going to use to reach out to families. In addition, we are working with Vin Nguyen to tap into the work that the Center for New Americans and the Bilingual Family Liaisons are doing. Whenever we have an opportunity, we're trying to figure out language barriers to make sure we include EL parents into that pool, because a lot of times they don't volunteer to become part of the committee, so we're reaching out to them through those two venues.
and what is that committee called now?
It's SEAC, and it stands for
So it's
School Engagement Advisory Committee, yeah.
School Engagement Advisory Committee. I'm sorry, I can never remember the
and
two names.
it's also the SIAC, or?
Yeah, it serves the function of SIAC, yeah.
It merged the Equity Advisory Committee with the SIAC.
Okay, and I really like the EC3. I think it sounds really good. You're doing a lot of really good things at Edmonds. It sounds like the kids are really benefiting, so thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. Awesome. Yeah, that would have been really bad. I do want to just say that, I think since we started implementing this report 3 years ago in 2015, I want to say that the quality has dramatically increased, and I think we're really getting the information when we originally set out to ask for it. Like, it's just every report feels more thorough, and that's incredibly helpful. So wonderful work on that aspect and to your team. I had a few questions and comments, and I think I'll start with when we were looking at absenteeism. I know you had mentioned that you guys are working with community partners and folks within the community to begin to address, okay, we're looking at this data, we're seeing these issues. What are your thoughts on that? Are you receiving any feedback from the community yet in terms of what they believe some of the solutions to absenteeism might be, or what's going on with the babies?
Yes, we have. We have formed we have 90 community partners, and we have formed a subgroup that it's 9 partners that have been interested in helping with the equity input we need. Mm-hmm. And what we heard, the action steps we have here, the response to data, is part of their feedback. Mm-hmm. And what they said loud and clear, actually the 3 groups, families, students, and communities, said the same thing. Mm-hmm. They said that they would like to see whole child mental health issues being focused. Mm-hmm. And they also said that they would like to see relationship building as part of the equity leads training being hit really heavily. And so we are taking those 2 recommendations to heart. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Awesome. And then, thank you.
Yep.
I want to go to Edmonds for a moment. because I know I've had the opportunity to visit with you, Principal Rittman, several times, and I'm always really, really impressed about what you all are doing over at Edmonds. I get a couple questions. The first is, it's so cool to see an elementary school, and I feel like Findlay is another school that's doing really awesome work. My question is, how do we begin to replicate that from our buildings in our district that we know are having phenomenal results for our students of color and our poor students? And do we have any examples in the secondary level, in our middle school, in our high schools? Because we see that gap a lot in our reports. We see that we start to see gains with our babies, and as they age, we lose them a little bit. So how do we replicate that in our elementary schools? And then do we have examples where that's happening on the middle and high school level?
The duplication is my goal moving forward, because we do need to share stories like Jeanette's story to help people visualize how things could be integrated and the results she's having. She has the highest Gallup survey result in the district.
Yeah.
And considering her population is 70% refugee and Black kids, that is huge. When we look at her numbers, she's moving a lot of kids. And so we are going to intentionally start sharing those stories so that at the leadership sessions, so that the other buildings can learn from each other. And we are, at the secondary level, I have been really looking for a building that has been integrating the three, and we see pockets of good work in belonging, thriving, or learning, but I haven't found one that is integrating the three and having good results for the three yet. But as we know, secondary schools are larger systems, and it takes longer for them to have the results we want. And so it's expected that you start from elementary getting more successes, but I do want to keep an eye on the secondary schools so that we can do the same thing for the secondary that we're going to do for the elementary, sharing those success stories, even if we start by one bucket, because there are schools that are having extreme success with behavior, with the thriving bucket, and there are schools that are having really good success with learning, and so we just have to start sharing those stories individually, and then hopefully in the future find one that has great success with the three integrated buckets.
Yeah, and if I just want to point out one thing. It's also really important to point out, I think, that Jeanette does a really nice job of taking calculated risks and not being afraid to try something new that it seems really out of the box, like yoga. I mean, I can't tell you the phone calls that I got when that started, people thinking, what craziness is happening over at Edmonds, but it was she and her team made a very intentional, purposeful choice that was directly in response to the data that the students provided them. And we try to be as supportive as we can around principals who want to do something outside of typical, which if we're not moving the data otherwise, we got to try something outside of the typical. And they've made it work really well. Now all of a sudden it's a cool thing, and it's not how are you trying to change our kids? So just wanted to call you out on that, Jeanette.
Thank you.
That's awesome. And I guess, I'm a little under the weather, so typically I might be a little bit more animated in my can you hear me? A little bit more animated in my response. What I'm saying is this is awesome, but what is our plan to take these isolated pockets of success and create them district-wide? And I think when we're talking about, I'm just going to go back to the equity plan because you guys presented that, and I know that that's informing this work. As an individual board member, and I would be interested to hear what my colleagues' thoughts are on this. Again, I would love to see us start, what are our goals in terms of where do we want to see our babies, not just on a year-to-year basis, but let's look at 5 years out. Let's look at 10 years out and then begin to, work towards it. So what's the plan for the long-term equity work as it relates to everything else we're doing in the district? I also think it's really awesome that we're seeing such growth at our demonstration schools for rigor. So that's exciting, because as we were embarking on this work, I know we're all anticipating to see what that looks like. So that's very promising. I had another question in terms of our additional programming too, Brother to Brother, Sisters for Success. We see the more, funding increase numbers. So it says that we're going to get to see results in terms of how they're performing in other areas in June. Yep. So I'm wondering if we see opportunities like this, if there's a tie or if there's a correlation, are there opportunities to expand that programming for our young people? And then my final thought is, so with our budget situation, how is that going to impact our work in the district? All of this work.
Well, I can speak for our small purview that we have. We've made equity a priority and budget accordingly for that. So our staffing decisions, our way that we've organized our team. You talked about the revitalization of our school climate culture team, that, there's a budgetary decision being made there, but it's strategic to continue to help schools. To just kind of further down on what Janet's done is, you've asked that question multiple times, how do we replicate that? And I think what you have to help educate the folks at the school level, but also at the same time, what Janet has done is met the needs of their students, and that's different at every school site. Those needs are different, and at the district level, we can leverage high yield strategies, but how those look at the school site have to be differentiated per school site. And I think so that's where we're trying to differentiate our support to be at the network and school level. And so to further your question around equity and budgetary, is we're budgeting for that. There's a budget set aside for equity work, but all of us, and this is just a small example of the folks that are involved in this work, are making decisions to continue to support equity even in this tough budget time.
Awesome. And I guess what I was saying, absolutely, we recognize that the needs of our students are going to vary school by school, but I think there's probably a lot of correlating, we're seeing overall trends when it comes to our students of color, right? And so it brings me back to conversations we've had in terms of our cultural proficiency work and building the organizational capacity, which is good to see in terms of getting our leaders, because what we have is, it seems like a leader that gets it, right? And I'm not saying that some of our leaders don't, but I do know we've talked about at this table certain leaders being at different places on the spectrum in terms of how they view this work and its importance to our students. So I'm going to continue to ask, as I always do, what is the plan to get them there? What are our goals that we want to set in terms of them getting there? What's the plan? What are the goals? And I know some of that will be tied up when we get a policy in place as well.
We have started providing the intercultural development inventory, which is the tool that measures where you are in the cultural proficiency continuum, to all principals. So I have met with all the high school principals. I'm meeting with middle school principals, and we're going to start elementary principals. So it's our goal that by the end of the year, they all have a plan for how to proceed in their development. And I think that will be life-changing for us,
Sorry, one final question. Oh, Principal Rittman, over at Edmonds, you were talking about you were leading all of the cultural proficiency, and now your teachers are leading that. Did you guys go through training before? Are you guys utilizing the modules that we have available, or through the
modules are an element of it, but the in-person stuff and that we're doing at the district leadership PLCs are really what's been driving that. Yeah.
Got it. That's awesome.
But Jana may have more to add.
No, that's exactly right. They come with me to the leadership trainings, and they gain the information that they have, and then they take it back and they make it their own. They work together really well, and then they decide where, as a staff, we need to go next. And so it's been a really great thing to see.
That's awesome.
And they're developing as leaders as well.
I lied. I have another question. In terms of your third grade referrals, you said you dug into the data, and that's when you were able to see the growth. So when you dug into the data, what did you find in terms of a lot of the reasons why these young people were being referred?
For our third grade students, third grade African American students that we looked at, it was all about relationships, and it was all about they needed more touches. And by that I mean they needed someone to check in with them in the morning, or they needed a check-in in the afternoon, or they just needed a teacher to have like breakfast club with. And so they just needed more attention. And by giving them more attention in a positive way, we were able to decrease the referrals. So that's what we found.
I think that's all of my questions.
And I will say that I will give my 2 cents on what I think. And I do agree around the goals, which is some of the work that we do need to continue with our monitoring and with the stuff that we worked pretty hard on prior to the end of the year. So hopefully, and that they should be more than a year out for those goals. And we started that work, and hopefully we can get that picked up again. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this might be jumping a little into the weeds, but I'm going to mention it. When we're talking about the redesign of the culture, climate, and community team to focus on whole child health framework, anchored in students' physical, social, emotional, and mental health. That sounds a lot like what the local school wellness policy team tries to do through local school wellness policies, which are housed in the food and nutrition department, oddly, but only because of the USDA requirement. Is there any cross-pollination with those and cross
It's a great
sector
example.
work?
You kind of set me up well here. So we have several of those things happening within the district, and the problem is food and nutrition has a plan, and the Office of Schools has a plan, and other folks have a plan, and it's not an integrated plan that we're talking about how we create whole child health within the school system. So we have brought in food and nutrition, Amanda, to our team to have discussion about, okay, what does it look like when we're implementing all of these things, healthy snack initiatives, food rescue with Fidelity, and got to the weeds really around breaking down whole child health into physiological health, safety, so how we look at that, social emotional belonging and development, and started looking at how can we integrate this into a plan that schools can look at and say these are the most high yield strategies for us to create whole child health, so that there's so many things out there we can get into that, like around mental health. We could have schools that go down a path around mental health when really that may not be the driver for change within their school. So that's where we're really trying to bring together all the folks around whole child health. And one of the models that we mentioned that we're looking at is the CDC model, or the WISC has a WISC model, the whole child, whole community, whole student health model that's helps in bringing all those pieces together. And look and see what that looks at a tier 1 level within schools. So that's a great example of how we can do that. We don't have a plan in terms of like how that is articulated for Fidelity within the school yet, but there's several examples that we're looking at that are helping guiding the work currently. Our plan is to continue to redesign our team so we can better support schools, and then develop that framework over the next year for implementation in the next year and a half.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because I think that's always been a frustration with that local school wellness policy, is that it's a requirement of the USDA, so it's housed in nutrition, but then it's siloed there to a point, and there's not an implementation, and I'm glad to hear that that you're all working together on that. Thank you.
I do have a question, going back to slide 18, and I apologize, I was kind of making notes, so I may have kind of missed this, but I'm just trying to reconcile slide 18 with the additional board document that we received. Does it have page numbers? Page starting, I think maybe at 5? I think it's, yes, starting with page 5. Specifically related to our Hispanic male students between winter of 17 and 18. For 3rd grade, we saw a decrease. 6th grade, we saw a slight increase. In 9th grade, a decrease as well. So I'm just kind of various numbers with the MAP literacy testing.
Are you looking at the slide specifically around the intensive literacy support?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yep, slide 18. Just kind of.
So what's your question again?
I'm just trying to reconcile the different. Here we see, from 16, 17, 17 and 18, an increase percentage on MAP, but my breakdown data actually shows a decrease.
I think it's a matter of
So
which
it's just
schools are
narrowed
being
down to
portrayed
one?
here, because the intensive support schools are just a small handful of
Okay.
elementaries.
Okay, yep, that's where, okay, I was thinking,
Yeah.
if we could, clarify, kind of pull up what's happening in the other schools then.
So it's kind of rectifying that percent needed, the college readiness is stagnant, and then we say we're growing, right? Is that what you're?
No, I'm just kind of going, okay, we've got some fantastic numbers on our slides, and then on our additional document, we're showing decreases actually happening overall through our district. And so.
Because last winter, our rate of growth as a district was less than 100%. So we were actually, last year in our first year of doing the MAP assessment, our students lost ground between fall and winter. Gaps grew. So our growth increased dramatically. So now we're at a point where we're maintaining or closing gaps. So that's what you see, like that gap is, that college readiness cut point doesn't look good, and it went down. but our actual rate of growth is increasing, but yet we're not growing enough to move that college and career readiness percent meeting, that cut point, upward. It's because that cut point is a very high cut point.
Right.
So if we would have thrown the fall percent meeting that cut point on there, you would have seen winter of last year or fall of last year to winter of last year, a downward slope, that we decreased the percent of kids meeting that cut point between fall and winter. And then this year, we actually pretty much maintained it. So we're having better growth throughout the school year, but our students, especially at the lower grade levels, like kindergartners, they started at a lower point this fall as well.
Okay.
And it's also, we're looking at some of those data points, we're looking at, it's subset of schools, and we're also looking at certain grade levels. So especially with that FAST data, it's K3 only. And when we're looking at the MAP reading data, it's grades 2 through 5 for elementary.
Can I ask specifically about maybe if you have any insight on the 9th grade students, which is page 6? And that's where we see our African-American males, between 17 and 18 in winter, we
Okay.
saw an increase. Overall, we saw an increase, but we saw a decrease for our Hispanic Latino males from 26 to 22, 26.84 to 22.22. And our African-American males went from 15.2 to 20.98, and all others had a slight increase as well.
Yes, so that cross section, we saw a decrease. I'm just wondering.
I think that's the biggest gap that I caught, so I was just trying to rewrite them in a manner on this paper that try to.
Yeah. I wonder how that compares, trying to find the 9th grade.
Didn't
ninth
see a
grade
specific
reading
slide
growth.
for 9th grade.
Yep. Yeah, because if you look at, table 3 on page 4, our Hispanic males they still grew at a higher rate than all students, but they did not grow at, as well as our African American males. You can see on that table 3, we had a huge jump in percent of African American males. We had that huge jump, which also reflects to that increase. But then Hispanic males, they saw about a 4% increase, so not that great of increase.
Right, but they did see an increase. Okay, and then the one I was looking at. Sorry. Okay, so table 6 versus table 3.
Yes, because that's right.
It's kind of hard to do this on here, sorry.
Growth, 9th grade reading above college and career readiness.
Okay, I see where you're going with the fall to winter, fall to winter. So, okay.
And also, this is cross-sectional, so it's last year's 9th graders to this year's
Right.
9th graders. So I wonder if we laid that out in a cohort, what that would look like. That might be interesting to, compare that, because it might just be those last year's 8th graders were even lower as 8th graders.
Be a lot happening in 1 year's time. That answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that actually in terms of, I know this is, the reports, are for the board as we dissect what's going on, but I do think they are accessible. And so for the public and their understanding, could we explain really quickly what our MAP data, how we measure that, and why some people might look at our suspension rate and how that's measured and think that's funny as well. So could we explain how we measure it and why we've decided to do it that way?
Mary, you coming back up here? I can do the suspension. The data that's included in there regarding suspension is the average number of suspension days per student. So if there was 100 days given and 100 students, it'd be 1 per day. So that's a ratio.
As opposed, but we weren't always looking at it in terms of a ratio. I believe when I first came on the board, that was something new that was implemented. Before we were looking at,
You were looking at incidences, probably?
yep, numbers. So can we talk about why we made that change?
When we look at that rate, you're looking at a more accessible way to dissect inequities that are happening across. So a number can be skewed by, number of students or population across different school settings. So when you look at a rate, it's a comparable number across all settings. So it provides and highlights equity issues easier for us.
Awesome.
Okay, and MAP data, we're using MAP basically because it's a really nice measure of growth. It gives us growth in several different ways.
And it's much better aligned with the Iowa core than the Iowa assessments. Just had to put that little plug in there.
Not read today's Des Moines Register, according to, sorry. So it gives us, it sets individualized growth targets for students. But it's also good to keep in mind, I know Jeanette said it, they're maintenance growth targets. So if I meet 100% of my projected growth as an individual, I met my growth target. So we have the percent of students meeting their growth target, but then we have percent of growth target met. So if my target is 10 and I actually grew 15, I met 150% of my growth. This is why that example of when we have 120%, that's good because we're growing at a rate to start to close gaps. So our kiddos that are at the 20th, 30th percentile, below where we want them to be, if they hit their growth targets on the nose 100%, they're going to stay at the 20th, 30th percentile. So we use that percent of projected growth met to look at students and say, this student is, 20th percentile. I really want to see them meeting 120, 130, maybe even 140% of their growth. So it's great at an individual student level for that purpose. Those college and career readiness cut points from the MAP, that's the other metric we have. Those are cut points. MAP doesn't define like what that cut point is. They did an alignment study with Smarter Balanced several years ago. So when we adopted MAP, that's when the state was leaning towards Smarter Balanced. So that's why we adopted those cut points, thinking that, well, next year we'll give the Smarter Balance, so this would be a good predictor. And then that's not gone the way that we anticipated. And so instead of changing those cut points repeatedly, we're just holding on to those cut points until we know where the state lands with the state assessment, just so, so that we're not, confusing people and ourselves by all of a sudden changing that.
Thank you.
So that's the map.
For those at home and here confused.
Yeah, I just had a couple other things. I just wanted to raise up some of the great work you're doing with your special education students at Edmonds. I don't think that was mentioned, and I thought you had mentioned that, and then I went back and looked at the numbers, and those numbers are rather impressive for the work that you're doing with your special education students. So I would love, when we're talking about our equity work, that's very important, but when we talk about our special education students, whatever you're doing at Edmonds, and I don't know if you want to provide a brief snapshot of what you're doing with your special education students, but you're doing some great work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I just want to reiterate that when we talk about goals, I also would be in support of setting long-term equity goals more than a year out. I think it provides us with a long-term vision. And when we really talk about some of our large vision statements by setting concrete goals and continuing to chase those and having them be long-term, it feels a little bit less like whack-a-mole and a little bit more like we're being very strategic, which is what I would love to see us do with our equity work. So.
And special education, students with special education goals are part of our equity work. They're a big part of it. So, yeah.
Just real quick, and we want to, just for a clarification on the goals we're talking about, I think we might be talking about a couple of different things. The goals for our monitoring KPI goals, which is what I was talking about, and then the equity work, just to make sure that there's clarification there too.
I just had one quick question. Don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but I'm going to go to the narrative report and the grades 9, 12% of students chronically absent. And if you look even at 2017-18 data, all males, 40.25% chronically absent. African-American males, 49.5% chronically absent. Hispanic males, 45.5% chronically absent. And I love all of the stuff that we talked about relative to engagement and ways that we really capture kids' attention to get them to school. But when we have 50% of our African-American students not attending and 45% of our Hispanic males not attending, there's not a whole lot of movement we're going to be able to make with any of those students. So can we speak specifically about interventions that we intend to implement around attendance? Getting them there is important to educating them. If we can't get them there, we're not going to be able to educate them.
Sure. And so just to clarify, you said non-attending, chronic means below
Chronically absent.
10% or more absenteeism. So we could have students that are attending at 90% or less is what we're talking about by that number, just to clarify that for the board.
So wait, say that again?
So chronic absenteeism is 10%. You miss 10% or more of school. So out of 10
Okay.
days, you miss 1 day.
Out of
Yep.
10 days, you miss one.
That'd be 10%.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that students are attending 50%. They could be attending 89% or 90% of the time, just
Right.
below. So they have 10% or more is what chronic absenteeism means. So some of that work we're trying to do right now around the data piece is get clarity on what the reasons that students are missing. So that's the context provided in that slide is that there's 82% of students that are kind of voting with their feet at the high school level saying that we're not attending class. Resulting in 35,000 minutes or hours of school. So those are things that we are currently looking at right now is how do we figure out exactly where the problem lies? And I think, we can make some basic assumptions, but that doesn't really put us in a strategic spot to make good decisions. So, Jamal might jump in here in a second, but when we look at the thriving belonging pieces, we know that students need to have connectedness in school. And so the reason that we wanted to show some of the things that we're working on tonight is we feel like we need to double down on some of those efforts to provide more connectiveness into school. And around that thriving piece that we feel like those absenteeism, we've wanted to make sure that students are coming to school that are healthy. And so we can make assumptions about why students are, but until we really dive down to those specific data points, doing things like our graduation walk and getting feedback around what are the reasons and causes for absenteeism, that helps us be a little bit more strategic. So that's part of that data has helped drive the decision that, the way that we've developed our multi-tiered behavior framework is something that we've talked about before. And that's limiting in terms it's only talking about safety and it's not addressing the whole child issue. And we understand that now based on the feedback and data that we received. And so therefore need to modify our plan to help encourage students to be attending school. So just to kind of put that in frame. So those are some of the things we have done so far and analyzed, but we need to do a data dive around what is that 82%, what are the reasons that are causing that, and how we can do more to attack some of those issues.
And I think that's what we have tried to do because that data was alarming to us too, and that's why we selected and identified that as a team as our main concern. And we have spent the last 2 months gathering feedback about that to define the interventions. What we found by meeting with the students who are part of our Student Advisory Council and are off-color and chronic absent is that they come to school and they don't go into the classroom. They told us. So they are at school, but they're not getting inside the classroom. And when we asked them why, they said because what we are doing in the classroom sometimes is not relevant to our lives outside school, and because we feel sometimes the teacher doesn't know us or care. And so we have developed a survey to gather student feedback about chronic absenteeism for males of color. And we are going to send that survey to a larger number of students so that we can identify exactly the things we need to change for them to be there. But you're right, if they're not there, we can't help them, and a lot of times they come, but they don't go in the class. And so we want to make sure relationship building and curriculum relevance are two things that we really think deeper about when we develop these interventions.
There's some high-level examples in the response to data in the last part of the report where you see those buckets, a lot of those bullet points are the response to that absenteeism. We didn't talk about all of those, but if you look at that, that'll give you some high-level overview of the things that we're doing to attack absenteeism.
So I had one other question, and I feel like at one point, and this is probably like dating myself on this board, but I feel like at one point, we were also able to identify the number of actual class periods that students were missing. So it wasn't even just about days.
Well, this
but
actually,
to your point,
this actually is a count of
Exact minutes.
equivalent days. So it doesn't mean.
okay.
So one person, one student may be at school every single day, but skipping class X every day, and those accumulate into full days. So that's included in this number.
So the slide that
That
I
makes
showed
sense.
around the reasons for absences, those are exact minute slides based on exact minutes. So to get after what you're talking about.
Okay. I have a couple of other questions, but in the interest of time, I'll send those offline. Anybody else? Natasha.
Sorry, since you kind of, you raised that, and I know we had some speakers on it previously, as far as chronic absenteeism, as tardiness, early morning, I mean, do we anticipate the new hours assisting as well as maybe particularly with our younger students, which range, 13 to 25% with the chronic absenteeism? Do you anticipate maybe an impact on that number since it's an earlier start time, and then, of course, a later start time for the high school students?
We would anticipate the high school number to improve, for sure. We don't think there will be a marked decrease at the elementary level, but we do think there will be improvement at the middle and high school level.
I would hope so, since that was kind of the the intent to assist them with that. It'll be interesting to see what happens the younger level, K through 5.
Any additional board questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have several items in our the board packet that are information only. Award of competitive quote for North High School auditorium balcony seating, preliminary plans for projects at East High and Brody, and the audit committee quarterly update. So hopefully board members have had a chance to review those. We're now to items of privilege, and I have a couple of things I want to bring up, and then I'll turn it over to the superintendent to chat just a little bit about inclement weather policy and protocol, since we had a number of inquiries on that today. But I did want to very briefly share a message that I shared with the board of the Broward County School District relative to the horrific incident that they experienced last week. I write with a heavy heart as I reach out to express our deepest sympathy in the loss of lives experienced by your district in the past week. The recent loss of students and staff at Stoneman Douglas High School calls us all to pause and reflect. Pause at the senseless act of violence perpetrated against innocent victims while reflecting on the challenges we face as a country relative to the issues of guns, violence, mental health, and trauma. We applaud the incredible courage demonstrated by Broward students who are choosing to use their values and voices to challenge our systems and policies with an eye towards a change and action. Your board, superintendent, students, staff, and community will remain in our thoughts and prayers in the coming days, weeks, and months. The Des Moines schools and our board stand with you in solidarity and resolve. Respectfully submitted on behalf of the Des Moines Public School Board, Terry Caldwell Johnson, Board Chair. I also wanted to share that the Council of the Great City Schools, which Des Moines Public Schools is a member of, as well as the Broward County School District, sent out a link for individuals who may be interested in providing support to the victims and their families and others who were affected by the senseless violence. There is a GoFundMe account that has been made available, and hopefully we can post that on our district's website so that individuals in our community who are interested in supporting the Broward County School District can do so through their educational foundation. This points up, obviously, a lot of questions that come up when we have situations of this nature relative to what we as a district are doing relative to the safety of our students. And I'm hoping that here in the next few weeks, we can just have a refresher on the things that our district is doing to address the issues of safety of our students, the things that we're doing around regular opportunities to refresh ourselves on ways that we protect not only our staff and our students in the building, but also to respond to any particular questions that may come up. So I'm hoping that we can just spend a little bit of time in a future board meeting just sharing that with our community, just so that people know that we do have protocols in place and that we hope that we will never be in a situation where we have to enact them, but to the extent that we do, that we are prepared and ready. So with that, I'll turn it over to our superintendent to speak not only about this issue if he chooses to, but also the request that I had for inclement weather policy and protocol discussion.
Well, I want to echo what Terry said about Broward. I shared this with the board last week. I distinctly remember being in a classroom as a teacher nearly 20 years ago as a high school teacher and receiving the news about the shooting at Columbine, which at the time was novel and scary and earth-shattering for those of us who are classroom teachers or building, especially building level administrators. And unfortunately, it now seems as though this is virtually a monthly occurrence, and the death toll per incident seems to continue to rise. We spend, as Terry suggested, we will review with the board in a public manner the steps that we take to preserve the safety of our staff and students. But if the public understood the amount of resources expended by school districts across the country just to ensure that our students aren't exposed to, an unstable person with a AR-15, it's mind-boggling. We have what ought to be more important things to worry about, and this is very important, but it oughtn't be something that schools are worried about, but obviously we have to take it very seriously, and we certainly do. And now about the weather, I speak to you as the most popular man in Polk County, I'm sure. I have to say, Bill Good, our Chief Operations Officer, and I talked about the imminent weather multiple times yesterday afternoon and into the evening, and we're in communication again at 4:30 this morning. He had a number of his folks who were out driving roads prior to 5 a.m. I was outside myself trying to assess the conditions. Obviously, whenever I'm in the position to make a call as to whether we ought to start school, delay school, or cancel school, or not, I have many folks who disagree and agree with me. We leaned a lot more toward the disagree today. I'm responsible for making this decision. There are a number of considerations that I go through every time this happens. Obviously, monitoring weather conditions personally, but also getting information from the National Weather Service and a couple of other services that send information out to us. I'm talking with our city staff about efforts about their perception of especially road conditions and what efforts are underway to mitigate any kind of danger on the roads. And then we have some other things that are unique to Des Moines when compared with our immediately surrounding districts. For instance, the number of rural miles that our buses have to travel. We have very few rural miles. Most of our routes, as you can imagine, being Des Moines public schools, are city routes, and so conditions tend to be a bit different for us from a road travel perspective than other districts. And some other dynamics that are unique for us are we partner with our regional transit authority to provide significant transportation for our middle school and high school students. They are not as nimble as school districts are in being able to respond to changes in schedules because they have other routes that are really not adjustable for them to be a viable organization themselves. And so decisions, especially in regards to a late start or an early release, have to be made well in advance of implementing that decision. And so we rarely are in a position to have a call for a late start or an early release without really making the day just an exercise in futility and really not getting any good, meaningful education happening. And so finally, the last thing that's really unique, well, two other elements that I would suggest are unique to Des Moines as compared with our neighboring schools in the same sort of weather pattern area. We have a huge food service operation. As you saw the feature on Amanda Miller a week or two ago in the Des Moines Register, we're the largest restaurant in Iowa. We're trying to serve over 20,000 students every mealtime, well over 20,000 students, and you can't start that work 20 minutes before mealtime and have a hot meal waiting for all the students who are counting on that. All that work has to start a lot sooner than that, and to avoid waste and to ensure that everybody is fed, we have to take that into consideration in terms of a late start or early release. And finally, and the most important thing that we take into consideration is the safety of our students and the health and well-being of our students. And many of our families do rely on at least 2 meals a day and snacks, and in some cases 3 meals through the school system. And if we do close down, we've essentially shut down that opportunity. I feel that I don't put people in danger in order to be able to feed students. I don't want people to get that impression. I'm just saying that the calculus of making the decision for Des Moines Public Schools looks a lot different than it does making the decision for Waukee schools or Carlisle schools or any of our other neighboring school districts. We had a good day today. I probably had a worse day than most because of all the negative feedback. I want to assure everyone that I'm not out to try to kill our students, as some people have suggested, or do them any harm. I sent 2 children to school today myself, and certainly would not have done that if I thought I were putting them in harm's way. There are going to be times in the future where Des Moines Public Schools makes a different call related to weather than some of our neighboring districts. Usually we make the same decision, but that's not always the case. And sometimes the weather tricks us. I know that after I left for work this morning, some schools still had not made the call. I had a 7:30 meeting this morning. Some schools were making the decision at 7:45. We're not able to do that in a district our size and actually implement that decision in a meaningful way. There's already too much of the machine in motion to make sure that we're ready to serve our 33,000 students. So to anyone who was inconvenienced today because of my decision, please accept my apology. And thank you to all the students who personally contacted me today with advice on how I can make that decision more effectively in the future.
I failed to ask my board colleagues if they had any items of privilege that they'd like to bring up. Yes.
Tomorrow is the Community Legislative Action Team Day on the Hill. We'll be starting at 8 a.m. at East High in the auditorium, moving up to the Capitol at 9 a.m., meeting on the first floor rotunda, and then going to meet with legislators throughout the morning to talk about our legislative priorities around the statewide penny sales tax, which is looking like it will go, but we will still keep that at the forefront. Preschool for kids in need, ELL, and also a bill that has not our priority, somebody else's priority, definitely. SF 270, a bill to end voluntary diversity plans, has potential to go to the Senate floor. This would have huge implications for Des Moines Public Schools. Essentially, they call it an elimination of diversity plans. What it is a resegregation of our schools. It would allow us, we would not be able to manage open enrollment in and out of the district based on our minority indicator, which stands as socioeconomic status according to our diversity plan. So we'll be speaking loudly about that and making sure that all of our senators understand the implications of that bill and what it would do for Des Moines Public Schools, and hopefully kill it before it even comes to the floor. So join us.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Yes, I guess I was saddened. A few days ago, we lost Jonathan Narcissus, a former school board member and leader of, in our community, and I know that the board sends condolences to his family. So,
Thank you. Other board members? Without objection, we will adjourn to our closed session.